Good morning, everybody. We'll get going in a second here. Hi, Jack. How are you? I see you checking in. Okay, I think we should get going. We're right at 10:01. Good morning, everybody from California. My name is David Amadia. I'm the president of Ridge. It's going to be my pleasure this morning to host today's tasting. So welcome to Ridge Vineyards Fall 2021 virtual tasting. Today we'll be tasting our 4 fall release wines. In the spring, we launched what was our latest innovation for virtual tasting, which a tasting we've been now holding for over 10 years. That innovation was the tasting pack, which was a huge hit with our participants, and we really enjoyed it as well. So this is round 2 with the tasting packs, and today we sort of expanded the tasting packs by including some soil samples in the kit as well from 2 of our estate vineyards. So that'll help spur some conversation, I'm sure, today. So hopefully you've all safely received the kits and the full tasting pack, and you have the 4 wines poured out in front of you on the tasting mat, and maybe even you have the 2 soil samples poured out in front of you as well. So the wines we'll be tasting this morning in order are as follows: the 2020 Grenache Blanc, 2019 Pagani Ranch Zinfandel, 2019 Lytton Springs, and then the 4th wine will be the 2018 Monte Bello. So a little Zoom housekeeping before we get going. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists, our production team. And feel free to use the chat to chat amongst yourself, to let us know where you're at, let us know what's going on, and things of that nature. We'd also really enjoy and appreciate if you checked in with us through our social tag, which is pound or hashtag Ridge Virtual, hashtag Ridge Virtual. So please send through your photos and thoughts through whatever your favorite social media platform is. We'd also just like to do a quick mention that we are starting a LinkedIn page for Ridge, really targeted at the trade, so folks like yourself. So please join us on LinkedIn at the Ridge Plays page, and we'll start to pump some interesting information your way. A couple of congratulations and welcomes. We'd like to welcome Poppy Monroe, who is our new Central Regional Manager. Poppy, great to have you on board, and really excited to have you as part of the Ridge team. And a congratulations to Katie Blakely, who has been promoted to International Sales Manager at Ridge. So congratulations, Katie. I'm really enjoying getting you up to speed in that area as well. So introduction of our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce David Gates. David is in charge of all of our vineyards at Ridge. He's been with Ridge for 32 years and always a fountain of information, and we're super excited to have him with us this morning. John Olney is our head winemaker and in charge of all of our facilities, that being both Lytton Springs and Monte Bello, and has been with Ridge for 25 years and neck deep into harvest right now, but we're excited he's been able to jump away from that and join us this morning. So a lot of experience on the call today, and excited to have everyone here. Maybe before we jump into the first wine, David, maybe we talk a little bit about the 21 harvest and how that's going. And I know it's been a bit of an unusual harvest for us, so I think people would be interested to hear how that's all going.
Sure, thanks, and welcome everybody. It's been a whirlwind. Some harvests, we have what I'd say in a typical harvest, although it's hard to think back to when the last typical harvest was with all the drought that we've had and the climate change happening and whatnot. But usually our Zinfandels come in first, which is great at Monte Bello because we can fill up our tanks with Zinfandel and then wait on Monte Bello. Chardonnay is always kind of the wild card our whites, where they come in typically with Zinfandel. So this year, everything has kind of been flipped on its head somewhat. The weather at Montebello has been quite warm, but only above our inversion layer. So you guys have all heard the talk about the inversion layer that sets up here over the bay. It comes in at about 1,700 feet, something like that. And that it's great because that's where most of our Chardonnay is, and it keeps the vines cool at night. They heat up in the day, and it's really nice for that. Well, what that usually means is our red vineyards, the Cabernet vineyards and Merlot, typically we start at the base of Montebello and work our way up to the top. Well, this year it's kind of topsy-turvy. Everything up on top has gotten ripe very quickly. So we are basically picking Montebello at the same time as we're picking all of our Zinfandels, from Paso Robles to Geyserville, Cloverdale. So it's been a crazy whirlwind harvest. The drought has meant that in unirrigated vineyards, or where we have very limited water, our yields are quite low and super concentrated. John can speak to that, I'm sure. So yeah, we're going to finish Montebello, all of the reds at Montebello this Sunday, and we still have 60 tons of Lytton Springs to pick next week. And Pagani is kind of normal, which is just bizarro world. You talk about unprecedented, and they're saying how the fires in the Sierras, we've had 2 major fires that have burned all the way up and over the crest of the Sierras. That's never happened before. That's never been recorded to have happened before. And we've never finished Montebello before Lytton Springs, except until 2021. So there you go. Yeah, we'll see how it all pans out, but the wines are looking great. So that's
great.
the good part.
Thanks for that update, David. That's super interesting, and certainly in a very unusual year. And John, I mean, what are you seeing in the tanks with as the grapes are coming in?
Well, like David said, I think that Zinfandel is such a big part of what we do at Ridge, and usually we're always a little concerned that because it's one varietal, because most of our Zinfandel is all grown up in Sonoma, in sort of the same microclimate, that all of our Zinfandel is going to get ripe at once, and we've got to scurry, we've got to get it in before the sugars get too high, and we prefer when it just sort of comes in more gradually, but not only did all the Zinfandel pretty much get ripened at the same time, but the real odd twist that's really been the biggest challenge is that all of our Bordeaux varietals ripen simultaneously and actually in advance of our Zinfandel. So it's really been a challenge in terms of just juggling when you have Grenache Blanc and Chardonnay and Cabernet and Merlot and Petit Verdot and Zinfandel all coming into the winery at once. It's sort of like a hospital with 500 beds and 500 people just show up and they're all really, really ill. You prefer if there's people coming and going. But I would say between we're well into one of our most serious drought years here, and between the two, in terms of Bordeaux varietals and Zinfandel, this is just my theory. I'd be interested to see what David thinks. We haven't really had much time to talk about it, but a lot of our Zinfandel comes from older vines with deeper roots, and I feel that the Zinfandel really has been able to weather the drought, whereas there's been a lot more stress in the Bordeaux varietals. But we're seeing great concentration in across the board, from Geyserville, from Lytton Springs, Paso Robles. And the Bordeaux varietals are fermenting a lot more slowly. So, there's more variability there. So it's pretty early in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, we're asking you to do a game analysis and we're still in the first quarter, I guess. But yeah, it's been an unusual year, but the quality seems to be outstanding given the concentration of the fruit. So we're looking forward to that. And David, any thoughts on what John was saying about old vines versus maybe some younger Bordeaux variety vines?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that to add a little bit to that is that both the North Coast and Monte Bello in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we've got about a third normal rainfall. And the biggest difference that I've seen is that we had a few spring rains, but not much, not like what saved us during the last 5-year drought that we had. What saved us in most of those years, even with very low rainfall, is that we'd had some spring rains. Well, we didn't really get that at Montebello this year. Sonoma did get one nice little rain in April that really, I think, helped, but that didn't do anything at Montebello. And for our unirrigated vineyards up in Sonoma, that did help somewhat. And also we're on more alluvial soils, which we can talk more about, and they tend to be more in the valleys. So the rain that does fall in the hills can kind of come down, any runoff off the hills comes down into those alluvial soils. And so there typically is a little bit more moisture in there. The other lucky thing at Lytton Springs is at our Lytton West ranch, where we have more young vines, is we have a beautiful, very good well there. So we were able to do a little irrigation as needed. And same thing at Geyserville, we were able to do some early irrigations to really help out, even out the crop level. We can't do that at Montebello. We'd have some deep wells, but they are for production, for landscaping around our tasting room, for living quarters, and tertiarily, or for irrigation. And we had to really limit the irrigation to young vines, otherwise they would die. And we have quite a few acres of young vines in the ground right now, so that's where we kind of concentrated the water, and most of those aren't really bearing yet. So we put water on them to keep them alive, but didn't get any fruit off of them. So, but there's always next year. You got to play the long game in agriculture.
After 32 years of farming, it's good to see you're still smiling, David. That's good. So why don't we go to the first wine, which is from the 20 vintage, which was also a challenging vintage in some ways, the Grenache Blanc from Adelaida. So John, why don't you kick us off with that wine?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, we have the Adelaida, and then we're going to finish with the Montebello. And both of these wines come from some of the most unique soils in California. Adelaida down in Paso Robles comes from soils with a lot of limestone in it, which is quite rare in California. And it's we really were surprised just in the first couple of vintages making this wine. One of the things you have to watch out, though, with Grenache Blanc, just like with its red counterpart, is alcohol can really become a factor. Sugars can really spike, and I think one of the neat things about this vineyard is the way they planted it, in terms of Roussanne and Picpoul being part of the equation. It's not co-fermented, so we picked those varietals separately. But for me, I really think the Picpoul is an important component in the wine. It really brings that nice acidity and focus to the flavors. It's a little bit, in a way, I sort of liken it to what Carignan does in our field blends for Zinfandel. Lower sugar, zingy acidity, and really helps to keep the wine nice and fresh.
Yeah, it is super fresh. I mean, I'm drinking it at room temperature, and the acidity is still very apparent, and the wine is super fresh, even at 65 degrees. But David, I mean, you found this vineyard for us. Maybe you want to tell a little bit about what attracted you to this site initially, and why you thought it would be a good fit for Ridge.
Well, I was just down there yesterday, right at dawn. So, and it's I love the vineyard, and I love the people that are farming it, and that's two things that we really look for when we're trying to source fruit. And I was pleasantly surprised when the folks at Adelaida said that they had some excess fruit, and so that was, I think, I don't remember anymore. It's harvest, but it was great, and we jumped on it. So these are limestone soils. It's very recent limestone. Well, recent. It's the limestone that is more typical that you see in wine growing regions in the world. So it's like 40-ish million years old. So it has fossils in it, sometimes of whales and whatnot. And it's all over the hills to the east of Paso Robles and a little bit to the west of Paso too. It's ancient seabed that's been lifted up. And again, limestone is really important in grape growing because as I kind of said in the little blurb on the Monte Bello soils, it keeps the pH in the sweet spot so that there are nutrients and minerals are readily available to the vines. The other thing that I love about this is Adelaida Winery, it makes great wines. And they really focus in on their farming. So they farm pretty much the way we would farm. And they're on their way to being certified organic, which is really cool. And they're really good to work with. The vineyard itself sits up at I think it's about 1,400 feet, 1,500 feet, but it sits up and their inversion layer is similar to Montebello. They're just above it. It's lower elevation down in Paso, on the west side of Paso, but they are up above it, where we also make a little Grenache Blanc from Halter Ranch, which is close and further out toward the coast. And those grapes sit below the inversion layer. So it's really fun to look at the difference, and different soils too. So it stays a little bit warmer at night there. So when they get ripe, the Grenache Blanc, you have to watch it because it can get, as John was saying, it can get ripe very quickly. And they have a great crew. They can jump in and pick pretty much when we want. So it's been a great relationship, and we're very excited to keep it going. So yeah, it's a beautiful spot.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's having visited there with you, it really is a beautiful spot to visit. And it's been a great addition to our portfolio. It's nice to have a white wine with the fall releases. We've never had a white wine to go with the fall release before. It's been a big success from vintage one on. Unfortunately, it's still limited in quantities, so there's not a ton of it, but we do have some we're hopeful to be able to source more in the future. David, is that fair to say?
Yes, we were able to work out a little deal with the folks at Adelaida, where they butted over some Viognier to Grenache Blanc. So we got the first fruit from that block in this year. So that was a nice little boost. And we're talking again with them to maybe perhaps planting a little bit more into the future. So we see this as a long-term relationship, long-term commitment on both Ridge and Adelaida to keep it going. We love the wines and love the people we're working with.
One last question on the farming practices there for the Grenache Blanc, David. How is it trellised? How do they farm it?
Oh, so it's a split. I would say it's a relaxed VSP. So it's kind of the shoots grow up vertically, and they have some catch wires, but it's shade. Murphy, could you show that a couple of those vineyard shots again? So the vines look, so it's cordon trained, the wide spacing, and yeah, so there you go. There's some wires, catch wires there. You see the two sets of catch wires, but they're spread quite a ways apart, like 12 to 14 inches apart. And Grenache Blanc is vigorous. Picpoul is very vigorous too. Roussanne, not so much, but that's the way the canopy looks, and that's a perfect way to grow the grapes in Paso. So Paso can get pretty warm there. It'll be over 100 quite a bit. It's not quite as warm as the Benny Ducey's vineyard, which is just south of town, but it still gets pretty warm there. So you want leaf cover on the vines, and they also have some shade cloth on the Roussanne because it can sunburn very easily. to kind of help out where if they don't have quite enough leaf cover. So that's the way we like to grow it. It kind of mimics head training, but it's on a cordon and it's along the row, so you can still do the farming around it. And yeah, that seems to work really well with those varieties. And also, well, the Grenache Blanc and the Picpoul Blanc have big clusters, so you can get reasonable yields with keeping them cordons, similar to and spur prunes, similar to what you can do with Zinfandel or Carignan, Petite Syrah versus Cabernet. It's hard to get sustainable yields and good quality spur prune with spur prune Cabernet. So anyway, a little nerdiness.
That's good. Nice injection of nerdiness. So let's go to the second one, John, the 19 Pagani, and we're going to be tasting two Zin blends from the 19 vintage. Maybe talk a little bit about the vintage as well, which it seems like a nice distant memory, the 19 vintage, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know. It seems all blur a little bit, but I mean, 19, as far as the season, it started out great. I mean, it was, we had enough rain during the winter. The crop was pretty even. It was a fairly plentiful crop, but the vines, were really healthy, lots canopy. And summer was there was some heat spikes, but it was good growing conditions. The challenge with 2019, of course, was that it was the year where we had fires that were close enough to the winery where they actually evacuated the entire town of Healdsburg, including all of us and our cellar staff. So fortunately, that happened late in the season, as opposed to 20 when fires came early. So we had actually just harvested the Pagani and had it in the winery and through fermentation. But Pagani is we first made our first Pagani going back all the way to 1991, and it's a really unique vineyard. It's in Sonoma Valley, so sort of in between Glen Ellen and Kenwood. And when you're in the southern part of Sonoma Valley, it's actually quite hot. But then you just move 3-4 miles north, and there's this little bowl that's almost carved out just for the Pagani vineyard, where it's much cooler. So we're ripening over a longer period. We get a lot of hang time, and the wine has great acidity, which is something we often fight in the warmer climates when it comes to Zinfandel. So it really has that bright acidity, which I think really helps to enhance the fruit both on the nose and on the palate. And also this is a classic field blend wine. We've got Petite Syrah, Alicante, mixed in with the Zinfandel. There's not much Carignan, I don't think, but you also have some Mataro. So it's a great site.
David, you've been farming this site for a long time and working with the Pagani family. I mean, what are your thoughts about this unique site up there? We're not the only one to source grapes from here. There's obviously, over the years, there's been many wineries that have sourced from this site, right?
Yes, yeah, we've been working with Dino Amatidi and his mom Norma and his uncle Louis starting in 1991. So we have a great history on this ranch. Dino is doing all the farming. He was always helping his uncle, and then by the mid 90s he was taken over all the farming of it, doing a great job. And the vineyard is kind of split into two. It's funny how that old timers kind of knew about this. There's a railroad track that runs by this creek that goes up from Sonoma up and Glen Ellen up into Kenwood. and it basically splits the vineyard. The soils are very different on the west side of that railroad tracks versus the east side. And the vines grow quite differently. So on the highway side, the east side of the railroad tracks, it's alluvial soil, deep, rich, the really, except in drought years, a very high water table. The vines grow beautifully. They really don't need a bit of water unless you're trying to grow young vines. So they look a lot like Geyserville, where they're bigger vines, happier vines. On the west side of that railroad tracks, it's a tighter soil, a little bit more clay. The oldest vine blocks are scattered in that section too. And that kind of reminds me a little bit more of Lytton Springs, where the vines struggle a little bit more. There's a little more intensity in the wine typically, and but they blended together. They both make a beautiful expression of Pagani. And it's funny, just like at Lytton Springs and Geyserville, we're typically picking them at the same time, more or less. The other great thing about this ranch is that the fourth and fifth generations decided to, with Dino's prodding, it's like his lifelong dream, they decided to try to keep the ranch in the family and have started investing in and planting new areas. So there was an old prune orchard that became a hayfield that became phase 1 replant, and an old prune orchard that became phase 2. So we are able to get a little bit more grapes that if when the quality is there, it goes into Pagani. And with Dino's farming, it's a field blend, about 15% or so Petit Syrah with the Zin. And with Dino's excellent farming, it's gone into Pagani every year now. So that's a good thing for everyone with that wine. So
yeah, no, that's a good thing to point out, David, is that there is good supply of this wine. That this was a good sized vintage coming off of Pagani in 19, and there is a good amount of this wine available. So that's an important point for everybody out there to understand. Yeah, the wine is tasting great. It's got that bright acidity, but but with dark fruit and red fruit mixed. It's a really pretty wine. It's very elegant, and it's got some of those tropical notes that always kind of set Pagani apart from other Zinfandels because of that cool side. It's really, really beautiful wine. People always think of Pagani as this sort of, I don't know, sort of like a rock star big blockbuster wine, but it's usually the last grapes we pick. So even in 19 with the fires, even with probably Pagani, the last grapes being picked, that was all in before the fires really had an impact on us in 19, but a very, very unique site. So let's go to the next wine, the 19 Lytton Springs. Also good availability on this wine. And I'm going to go ahead and pour my soil out right now and just take a look at that. Haven't done that yet. Looking forward to this.
But we're supposed to say, don't eat it. It is not edible, right?
We have smart distributors. We don't have to tell them that.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, there you have it. So maybe we do start off, David, talking a little bit about the soil at Lytton. And I know it's varied, right? I mean, it's not like we have one unified soil type at the site, correct?
Absolutely. So this is one of 5 soil types that we have at Lytton Springs, and this is the soil type that I chose because we share this at Lytton Springs. It's the same soil series, soil type as what is the 95% of what we grow at or where we grow grapes at Geyserville. So this is an alluvial soil. One thing you don't see in this soil sample are the pebbles, the rocks in it. So it's quite a bit of actual rocks, and they're river rocks. They're rounded. They've been tumbled as alluvium, as the Russian River / Dry Creek, as it's kind of spread out and deposited this soil. But we had to screen it down to a 1/4 inch, so otherwise it wouldn't fit into the bottle. But there's like 15 or 20% of rock in there, and typically the deeper you go into this soil, the more pronounced is that gravel. And that's really important because it allows it basically allows for very good drainage. So this soil is a young soil. It's maybe 1 to 2 million years old. It has plenty of nutrients in it, but it's not a rich soil, and it's not, by rich I mean it's not you can't grow corn on it, right? It's too, it
Okay.
doesn't hold enough water. It's perfect for vines in that way. So the water table is up when it, in a normal year, when we get good winter rains, the water table is up so that vines have enough water, it recedes quickly and the vine roots kind of follow it down and are able to draw on that deep water throughout the season. The vines are happy in this soil. The other soils that we have at Lytton Springs all have a little more clay in them. And like the hills at Lytton Springs, they're more like 40% clay, which is a fairly high amount. And clay holds a lot of water, but less of that water is available to the plants. It's either too much. If there's too much water in it, there's not enough oxygen and the roots can't really live. And if it's too little, it's just the roots can't pull it out by capillary action. So that makes the vine struggle a little bit more. So in the hills around the winery versus the flats, typically the flats come in with a little bit larger crop and they get ripe a little bit earlier than the hills, which add a lot of intensity, but struggle to try to get to 24 or 26 bricks. We usually have to pick them a little bit less than that.
So we're between Lytton East and Lytton West, David. Do we find this soil type predominantly?
Yeah, so this is alluvial soil, so it's in the flats, and there are it's called Pleasanton sandy loam or gravelly loam, however you want to say it, and it's anywhere where, so it's recent alluvium where any structure, any hills at Lytton Springs are usually a little bit older, and so those are soils that. Some of them could still be alluvial soils, like the sites that we have on the bench, East Bench. That's also alluvial soils, but it's like 40 million years old. So it was when the ocean was up really high, 40 million years ago, that it laid down a bunch of the rivers that were in there, laid down a bunch of dirt, and then the waters receded, and then with seismic activity and erosion, it lifted these hills kind of got lifted up. And then eroded away. This particular soil though is basically, well, 1 to 2 million years ago. It's hard to say because none of us were around, but that's when there was a lot of more seismic activity when the Sierras were were finishing their lift, and there was, whenever we'd have a big rain event or whatever, maybe that was about the time I think that Mount St. Helena eroded and blocked the Russian River that used to run all the way through Napa. It blocked it off there, and then it kind of settled around Santa Rosa and went out the coast at Jenner. So that's kind of the differences. I guess I'm kind of meandering a little bit, but it's neat the way that the way geologic time is so different than human time is. And but to get back to the recent alluvium, for wine grapes, it's really nice because of the rock in it, that the gravel that allows good drainage, and the fact that as long as the mineral balance is good, there's enough calcium in the soil, the vines grow beautifully.
Great. That's awesome, David. Thank you for that. You meandered like the Russian River a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, so John, about the wine itself and coming from the 19, which was a year we did get good rainfall going into the year. But what would you say about the 19 Lytton?
Well, I think what's really neat about Zinfandel, and I think these two wines, the Pagani and the Lytton, really exemplify it, is and which is why I'm certainly in the camp that Zinfandel is kind of California's grape. It's certainly where Zinfandel found its home, because it really reflects where you plant it. And you can really see it in these two wines. With the Pagani, you have more of that real bright cherry focused primary fruit. But then you get to the Lytton, and the Lytton always, to me, and the 19, I think, is a great example of this. It's almost a little bit like a Rhone wine. There's a pepperiness to it, a little bit of sort of rose petal, which I really get in the aroma. And then, getting to the soils, like David was saying, a little more clay in the soils at Lytton. And I think that confers a little sort of bigger shouldered wine. You get some of that tannin that's coming both from the soil, but also from the fact that Petit Syrah is a fairly big component in terms of the field blend at Lytton Springs, which contrasts, for example, to Geyserville, where Carignan is more the larger component in terms of the secondary varietal. But I think overall the 19s, what's really great about it, I think across the vintage, certainly here with the Lytton, is there's this nice richness to it, but I think there's an elegance to the wines as well. So they're really enjoyable, I think, now in their youth, but I think they have the balance and the structure to be wines that are going to age beautifully for 10, 12, 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, John. It's like, whenever you taste Ridge Zinfandel side by side, same vintage, the winemaking is the same pretty much. The barrel handling is the same. So it really is, only difference is the vineyard, and the vineyards really do come through very clearly side by side here in these two wines. And it's a great example of what you as a winemaker are always trying to do at Ridge, which is to capture these personalities in these sites. And this is a perfect example of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think we were really successful in 2019 with the Zinfandels. And one of the most important things is really picking it at the right time, because as we all know, Zinfandel can certainly produce a lot of sugar. And if you really don't get in there and pick it at the right time, you start getting these wines that are pretty high in alcohol, and you really lose that sense of place. You sort of lose the definition of the terroir.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say if our wines were over 15%, they'd all taste pretty similar, right? I mean, it's really important to keep those wines in the low to mid 14s in order for that character to come through. So, but that sounds like it's been a particular challenge this year, John, to get in there and get that done.
Yeah. This is not 2019.
Yeah, okay. Well, good. Well, why don't we move to the fourth and final wine, the 18 Monte Bello, John? I'm going to go ahead and pour this soil out as well. And why don't we just actually talk about the comparison of the two soils to start, David, to see what is the difference that we're looking at here between Monte Bello, Santa Cruz Mountains, and Lytton Springs, Story Creek Valley.
Oh, like 140 million years.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm being facetious, but the Monte Bello soil is kind of completely different from the alluvial soil that we showcased for Lytton Springs. So Monte Bello is a limestone-based soil. It's actually a melange of limestone and greenstone, and in some parts of the vineyard, as you get closer to the bay, there's a little bit of volcanic in too, down at Klein Vineyard, Jim Samare. And it was, geologists call it exotic foreign terrain. So it was basically a seamount that was on the Farallon plate that is the plate that's getting subsumed underneath the North American plate by the Pacific plate. It's basically the San Andreas Fault is that the difference between the North American plate on the east and the Pacific plate to the west. Well, a long time ago, like 140 or so million years ago, in the Franciscan era, the seamount on the Farallon plate was formed that is a difference or a mix of this really cool limestone that doesn't have any fossils in it. It's fairly dense and very high in calcium carbonate, so high that there's a 120-year-old cement quarry at the base of Monte Bello called Permanente. So it was formed, and in between, as the limestone was forming, there was also this greenstone, which actually, when it's exposed to air, it turns red. because it's full of iron. And that type of sedimentary soil is very common in the North Coast. Not always called greenstone, but you see it quite a bit, and that's where you have a lot of hillside soils are old and are turned red because of the iron in them. So this seamount was actually stuck onto the western edge of the North American plate, and then with the San Andreas fault lifting and pushing and pulling, and then the volcanic activity that the subsummation of the Farallon plate caused with lifting the Coast Ranges and also in the Sierras, lifted up this piece of Monte Bello. And then, the years and centuries of rain kind of eroded away soil until we're left with these pieces of rock, this mix of rock, limestone and greenstone that has weathered very nicely and stands out. And Oseo Peroni was the first person to plant all the way up on top, and the partners that started Ridge also lucked into, along with the theologian from Stanford that planted the old vines that we still have a few Cabernet vines from 1949, kind of planted vines here and maybe didn't recognize it as being as world class at it as it has become, under Paul's tutelage. But they did realize that they could grow really good quality grapes here fairly easily. And that's, again, because that limestone keeps the pH in a sweet spot. So it's perfect for vines, not too acidic, so you don't get mineral or metal toxicity, and not so basic that the vines just wouldn't grow on it. So that's really key, I think, to growing it. And then it's like anything, if you have a good site and you treat the grapes with respect and then the wines with respect, you can and keep at it, right? I mean, keep doing the same wines for 50, 60 years now. You can, if you're in the right spot, you can really find a great wine, make a great wine out of it.
John, let's talk about the wine itself now a little bit. Obviously, this is a site where at Montebello, where you have great soils, you have mountains, you have proximity to the ocean, you have all these things working in terms of, and then planting the right variety there as well. But as it all comes together, what's happening in the glass?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, if you go back to 2017, I mean, I would say 2018 was probably the most, so to speak, normal year that we've had, closest to it. And we had lower rainfall in the winter, but we had a lot of late rain in the spring, so that put a lot of moisture in the soil. It disrupted flowering a little bit, so we were sort of starting off with lower yields, and I think what's typical at Montebello, what we saw in 2018 was these sort of a mild summer, no real big heat spikes, and really benefiting from the proximity to the Pacific Ocean. So that we really, one of the things that makes Montebello unique and really contributes to the overall quality and character of the final wine is the way in which the Pacific Ocean acts like an air conditioner and really kind of keeps those temperatures down. Vines are like us. They don't like really big extremes, and that's one of the benefits of having that cooling effect. And we also started the harvest. It was fairly normal in terms of the timing. We started harvesting the Bordeaux varietals on September 18th, and just by coincidence, I think we're going to finish. We're going to finish harvesting everything at Montebello on September 18th this year. So really a stark difference between the two. But great concentration right out of the fermenters. Beautiful balance. The quality of the tannins. They were ripe, but still getting that with lower sugars and a lower alcohol. So I think it's one of the better built Montebellos in recent harvests that we've had, and it's pretty rare. I don't know a Montebello that we've made that won't age for 20 years, but I think this is something more, that is going to go well beyond that.
Yeah, it's always striking to go from the Zinfandels to the Montebello and just see the concentration in this wine and the depth, and that's something that's always struck me also about Montebello. It's a powerful wine, below 13% alcohol, so that power is coming from the concentration of the wine, right? Which is, David, what small berries, small clusters, small crop load, and all that leads to those type of concentrations in the wine.
Yes, and different varietal too. So Cabernet has very small berries and has a lot of tannin. Our Merlot has a lot of tannin too. And those small yields, small berries concentrate the flavors. It's also the climate where we are in a typical year at that, above the bay. We start spring fairly cool. It starts later than we do in Sonoma, and which allows for a little bit longer harvest, and so we tend to get physical maturity, or I should say phenological maturity, good tannins, and everything at a little bit lower sugars. So we're not, except in a year like this, we don't have to jump in and say, okay, we need to pick because the sugars are going so high, or so high so fast. Rebecca had a question about or farming practices.
Yeah.
And yeah, so let's see. We are sustainable on all of our vineyards, all of our estate vineyards, which is about 75% of what we do, 70-ish%. And sustainable through fish-friendly farming, which is this great, also known in Napa. Napa has to brand everything, and in Napa it's called Napa Green, but it's a really neat certifications. It's called fish-friendly farming from the California Land Stewardship Foundation or Institute, and you should read up on it. But it's basically trying to keep your soil in place, because that's the most important thing, and that's what can erosion. Excess erosion can cause a lot of problems, and has in the past. We're also organic. By next year, we will be 100% organic at Montebello, and also all of our vineyards in Sonoma. So right now we are let's see, this is 2021. We're 100% organic at Lytton. We have one little 4-acre block at Geyserville that is going to be certified next year, and at Montebello we're about 80% organic, and we have a little piece that's going to be, the rest of it will be certified the following year. We are in the process of asking our growers that can do it to go organic, and we're going to set a fairly aggressive timeline for them, and that's something that we are really looking forward to. So
Yeah,
I hope that answered.
yeah. No, you answered that really well, David. And this is not anything new. I think our first sustainable certification was in 2003, and we started the move to organic farming on our estate vineyards in 2008. So this is something we've been at for a long time and committed to. And I know in sales and marketing, we're all really a little frustrated when 99% of the Lytton Springs is from organic grapes and 1% is not, and we can't put organic on the label. That always drove us a bit crazy, but we're getting close to the point where pretty much all of our estate wines, Montebello, Lytton, Geyserville, East Bench is already listed as organic. We'll have that on the label, so we're excited about crossing that threshold here in the near future. John, I wanted to go back to tannin, because David brought that up earlier with the Montebello and tannin management with this wine, and how do you dial that in? Because really with Cabernet and Bordeaux varieties, this where it's grown, this can get overly tannic very quickly if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts at great reception. Typically, for all of our Cabernet and a lot of the times also for Merlot and Petit Verdot, we'll be opening the crusher roller. So we're fermenting a whole berry that off the bat tends to, it moderates how much tannin you're going to draw out, as opposed to crushing the grapes. And then, we watch temperatures really closely. The higher the temperature, the more you're going to pull out. In most vintages, certainly like in 2018, again, you're benefiting from maturity at lower sugars. Lower sugars means less alcohol. Less alcohol means you're not pulling as much out as quickly as you would at higher alcohols. And then, probably the big tool we have then is in how often do we pump over, the length of the pump over. Do we pump over once? Do we pump over twice? A lot of times towards the end of fermentation, we'll just stop pumping over altogether and simply just circulate the tank just to bring it some air without really distributing the juice across the skins and therefore pulling out more color. And then the final part of the equation comes at pressing, where we will divide up the press fractions usually into 4 kind of groups, starting all the way from what's just simply draining out of the press itself when you put the grape skins in, all the way up to the final pressing, the final quarter of the pressing, which is going up to 2 bar, and then evaluate those and decide whether we're going to put them in the free run or not. There's plenty of, and 18 was one of those vintages where we kept a lot of the press aside.
The wine didn't need any additional tannin. It was good as is. Yeah. The way that winemaking at Ridge handles press wine is so unique, and anybody who visits and sees how we do it is always amazed, because they've never seen it at any other winery, about the detail that we go into with how we handle press wines. But it definitely shows in the final product in terms of the balance of the wine when it's in the bottle. So I think we've made it through, and I think we've answered the majority of the questions. So I think we're going to give our friends 7 minutes of their lives back and call it a morning. But this is our virtual tastings are always important. It's our twice a year we get to touch in and touch base with all of our partners throughout the United States, and that's important. But during COVID, when we've been so limited and you've been so limited on travel, I think these tastings have taken on even a greater importance. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and attention. Have a great fall. Good luck with the fall release, and we'll look forward to checking in with you in the spring of 2022 at the spring virtual tasting. So thanks again, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Stay safe.
Yeah.